Watching the situation had not eased my mind as I'd thought. Truthfully, I wished I hadn't stayed in that ditch. That I hadn't watched them. I could have turned away at the first sight and headed back to my warm and comfortable home. But I'd made my decision. And I was now tainted with the events that had unfolded before me. I feared for the fate of the town with this knowledge. That treasure chest. It could have been a collection of every valuable good from within it for all I knew. I climbed from the valley with haste, nearly sprinting towards the entrance of the town. With certainty, I was prepared to find the spattered bodies that would surely lay within it. Prepared to see blood flowing through the grooves of the cobblestone streets like miniature rivers. Prepared to see absolute destruction. I reached the gates in short time. They would lead through a small overlook and directly into the farmland of the community. How many crops would be shredded, picked, or burnt? Visions of complete wreckage flashed in my mind while I continued my run through the archway. The large door at the end of the stone hall was cracked open ever so slightly. Just enough room to squeeze through quickly. I pressed myself through the entrance, eyes shut in fear of viewing what had become of my old home. The instant I was fully through the crevice, I forced my eyelids to open. Greeted by a man in a unique uniform. Full armor and a tabard draped about him with the crest depicting a sickle, shovel, and a blade. He greeted me heartily, holding out a gloved hand after removing it from a rather powerful-looking axe at his side. His voice was bright and cheerful. To say I was awed would be an understatement, especially considering the thoughts I'd had racing in my mind previous to such an encounter. The man didn't spark any sort of familiarity with me. Then again, the helm upon his head made it very difficult to note his facial features. It had been such a long time as well. It was highly likely that new farmers or townsfolk had moved in since my leave. Regardless, his warm greeting urged me forward to briskly grab onto his leathered palm with a firm shake. He laughed jauntily and directed me to the town center for a big event. A new festival of the year started just on this very day, as it so happened. A day to be called the Harvest of Treasures. When I attempted to beg for his attention on what I'd seen outside, he cut me off and hurried me along, saying this party was something to experience, rather than to hear tales of. He moved around my side and through the old creaky door without listening to another word, shutting it soundly behind him and leaving me in a light dismay. There was no use in sitting around at the front. I picked up my pace through the cobblestone street in the direction of the town center. Rows of crops and healthy-looking farmland passed me by in my haste. Things seemed to be perfectly fine, if not better. Farms were accompanied by small wooden structures, more like shacks than houses, yet home to many different families. I wondered how many still lived in these abodes. The buildings grew denser, leading through a minimal-looking market, and finally up the hill towards the very center of the village. They'd changed immensely since my time here, towering high above me now on multiple levels. The cheerful sound of music echoed through this hall of markets, a soothing river of strings and horns pouring down from the hill above, accompanied by excited chatter in all directions. Upon reaching the crest of the path, everything was revealed. The leader sat on top a solid oak throne next to his wife, 2 more seats near that for his children. They were beneath a shaded linen cover, watching the band to the left of the large circular path dance with the utmost of energy. Crowds of familiar, as well as unrecognized faces spun wildly about the area before the bards. Laughter, smiles, and joy hanging in the air above them all, akin to a ray of bright light. A few stragglers moved about on the other side of the circled path, socializing beyond a small number of wooden carts with food and goods displayed in plentiful amounts. In the very center of the circle, a roaring fire burned brightly. The blaze climbed high, reaching into the peaks with little effort, seemingly dancing along to the beat of the lutes and other instruments. Its bellow of smoke continuing even higher to join in the clouds far beyond. My mind became conflicted. I'd not forgotten of the horrors that I'd seen outside of the town, yet causing a panic in the midst of this large gathering seemed unwise. I wasn't even sure who to tell of it, in honesty. The leader would have been the first choice, but I was only able to glare wickedly at him from across the area. He was the reason I was no longer supposed to be within these walls. The reason so many had cast me aside. An unforgivable act. But what had happened soon before felt almost worse than that. Even if it saved his pitiful life, it could very well save those of the good people all around me now. I moved forward hastily, towards the set of thrones. He quickly noticed my advance, and turned to face that direction, the bright smile never leaving his wrinkled cheeks. He loudly greeted me, welcoming me to the festival as a new visitor, proclaiming of all the drink and food there was to be had, while introducing himself boldly. It was impossible to resist my own greeting, as I gripped onto his hand, kissing the large jeweled ring upon it respectfully. "It's a pleasure to be back, Lord Yalskar." He lifted his palm from me in a bit of alarm, quickly asking how I knew of his true name and what I meant. With a sly smirk, my response was simple. "You mean that you do not recognize me? The old, crazy, insane alchemist of the town?" His jaw dropped, the smile fading immediately into pure awe. He eyed the youthful look about me, searching for any sort of falsehood to it. But intrigue had already captured him thusly. How is this possible?" he questioned, still gazing. "Simple," I laughed heartily. "My elixir, the one you frowned upon." He shifted in his seat, somewhat uncomfortably, reacting quietly so as to not create a scene. "Oh, come now. You can't possibly blame me for that, my friend. Your wild experiments were, and likely still are, quite dangerous, of course." "It's all in the past now, I suppose," I calmly retorted. "For now, there is a more pressing matter I need to speak to you over." "There are always matters to discuss. Enjoy the party, my friend. Today we have grown great in wealth, and we must celebrate. We can speak when it comes to a close." "I think this may be far more urgent than you might imagine, Yalskar," I posed in a rather dreaded tone. He frowned deeply, as if I was disturbing a slumber of his. Looking about in thought for a moment, he nodded and hesitatingly agreed to speak to me in private. He excused himself briefly from his wife and slowly lifted from his throne with creaking joints, taking an arm around my shoulder to walk off the path towards his hall. The large, dark oak structure stood tall, just a short ways away. Stone steps leading up to fairly massive front doors. The pathway leading in both directions around the building, off to the walled garden where he and his family were only allowed to tread. Surprisingly, he veered off to the right of the hall, leading us down that very path. I looked back in a slightly confused manner. Were we not going inside? I figured it'd be best not to speak up at the moment, and to just keep following. We can speak most privately back here. You should consider yourself lucky, Alchemist. Very few are ever allowed to enter the Earl's yard, Yalskar smugly mentioned to me, clearly attempting to compensate for his disbelief in me so many years ago. Before I had a chance to respond to his arrogant comment, we'd reached a large, solid iron door. Lodged between two of the thick stone walls, it was an obstacle without a doubt for even the most acrobatic thief. He reached into his attire to grasp at a ring of keys, sorting through them until finding a very specific one. The tumblers in the door clicked powerfully as he undid the lock, swinging the door slowly open while welcoming me in. He let it shut, forcefully, behind us before continuing on. Let's walk around still whilst we talk, my friend. You can admire the garden I have tended to for all these years, all the while. What is this urgent matter that you speak of? His attitude was coming back, the very one that he'd had so many years ago. The thought that he was the superior one to all for every little thing he did. It was hard not to notice, and it certainly didn't make it any easier to share my tale. I looked about before starting the story, scanning over the vast amount of crops and other flora. Several days ago, while I was on a walk, I passed some very interesting people. Yalskar interrupted me suddenly. That sounds absolutely fascinating. Who would think that you would find people on the road? His smirking tone was growing very irritating. The temptation to unsheath my axe and leave it within his skull was brewing inside my core. I exhaled a false laugh and thought about the seriousness of the situation, attempting to continue my tale. They were riding on horseback very quickly, headed this direction. I wasn't able to get a very good look at them, but something felt off. Again, Yalskar made it a point to cut my words short, as if he truly didn't care. People are in a hurry in this age. You're going to hold that against them? It wasn't their hurry that worried me. They were donned in very dark armor, and nearly ran over me with their steeds. He laughed jauntily at the mention of such misfortune, apparently finding quite the humor in imagining me being flattened onto the cobblestone pathways. Clearly, you got out of their way, it seems, he chuckled. There was no use in giving details to him anymore. I found my brow twitching from the angst building inside of me and finished my story in one fell swoop. I saw those men again, and I watched them put an arrow into the back of an innocent man right outside of this town. Yalskar's eyes went cold, solid and frosted like fresh ice atop a lake as he stared at me. How much have you had to drink, my friend? I'm starting to think that potion of yours only made you look young, because you're sounding as crazy as ever. Even with the knowledge I'd shared, he still found time to berate me in disbelief. He truly didn't care one bit. I was just burdening him with time at this point for all it seemed. I took a moment to breathe deeply, trying not to lose control of myself. It was a mistake to try to speak to him, even after all these years. His jealousy of my success was only making him seethe with extra hatred. I looked about the garden, still walking along despite trying not to stare at him, gazing over the plots of various vegetables and herbs, questioning why he was denying the issue. It was in this moment something interesting caught my eye. In the corner, tucked ever so slightly behind a few crates of what could only be assumed as supplies, an odd sight piqued my curiosity. Amidst a patch of dry ground, there sat a large mound of muddy, fresh soil. That would be a poor place to plant something. It looked more so as if it had been upturned for a different reason. My eyes shot open and I looked at Yalskar, who was glaring back at me with an uncomfortable stare. My mind flashed between all the events of the day. Back to the dirtied treasure chest the murderers were hauling forth from within the town, to the mention of sudden wealth, to the very strange plot of fresh soil before us. And it all clicked into place.